He stood in the corner, and for the first time in his life, his body refused to listen. This is not a story about boxing. This is about the moment a god realized he was human. The 11th of December, 1981. Nassau, Bahamas. Muhammad Ali versus Trevor Berbick. The night the greatest had to face what he'd been running from for years. His own mortality. Nobody wanted this fight to happen. Not his doctors, not his family, not even the Boxing Commission in the United States, which is why they held it in the Bahamas, a makeshift ring, a cow pasture nearby. The atmosphere felt wrong from the beginning. Ali was 39 years old. He'd already retired twice. His hands trembled. His speech had started to slow, but he convinced himself, and everyone around him, that he had one more miracle left. He didn't. The locker room before the fight was unusually quiet. Ali's team moved around him like mourners at a funeral. They taped his hands, they laced his gloves, but nobody spoke. When someone did try to offer encouragement, Ali just nodded. No poems, no predictions, no trash talk. The man who once declared himself the greatest with absolute certainty now sat in silence, staring at his reflection in a cracked mirror. What did he see? A champion, or a ghost of one? The walk to the ring felt longer than it should have. Every step seemed heavier. The crowd was smaller than he was used to, less than 8,000 people. For a man who once filled stadiums with 100,000 screaming fans, this felt like performing in an empty theater. But Ali kept his head up. He climbed through the ropes. He raised his fists. And for a brief moment, the old fire flickered in his eyes. Then the bell rang. The first round revealed everything. Ali moved like a man underwater. His legendary footwork, the dance that had made him untouchable for 2 decades, was gone. He shuffled. He dragged his feet. Trevor Berbick, younger and hungry, circled him like a predator who'd found wounded prey. Ali threw jabs, but they landed short. He tried to slip punches, but his reflexes betrayed him. His corner shouted instructions, but his body couldn't execute them anymore. Between rounds, his trainer whispered urgently in his ear. Ali nodded, but his eyes were somewhere else. Not in the Bahamas, not in the ring. Maybe back in Louisville, maybe in Zaire, maybe in Manila. Places where his body still obeyed, where the impossible was just another Tuesday. But this wasn't then. This was now. And now was unforgiving. Round after round, the same pattern repeated. Berbick landed punches. Ali absorbed them. Sometimes Ali would throw a combination, and for a split second, you could see the shadow of who he used to be. A flash of speed, a glimpse of timing. But shadows don't win fights, and everyone watching knew how this would end. Everyone except Ali. Or maybe he knew too. Maybe that's why he kept fighting. Because stopping meant accepting the truth. By the 8th round, something broke. Not his body. His body had been breaking for years. Something deeper. You could see it in his eyes. The realization, the acceptance. He was no longer the man who'd shocked the world. He was just a man, tired, hurting, holding on to a version of himself that no longer existed. Berbick landed a right hand. Ali stumbled. Not badly, but enough. Enough for the crowd to gasp. Enough for his corner to look away. The 9th round was the longest 3 minutes of Ali's life. He moved on instinct alone. Muscle memory from 10,000 rounds in 10,000 gyms. But muscle memory isn't enough when your muscles don't remember. Berbick controlled the pace. He landed almost at will. And Ali, the man who once made champions quit, who once made the impossible routine, could only survive, that's all he had left. Survival. When the final bell rang, there was no celebration. Berbick raised his arms, but even he looked uncomfortable, like he'd just beaten someone's grandfather. Ali walked to his corner slowly. He sat down. He looked at his trainer. And for the first time in his career, Muhammad Ali had nothing to say. No excuses. No promises of a comeback. Just silence. Heavy. Final. Permanent. The decision was unanimous. Trevor Berbick defeated Muhammad Ali. But nobody remembers Berbick winning. They remember Ali losing. There's a difference. Winning is about skill. Losing, especially for someone like Ali, is about something else entirely. It's about time. It's about limits. It's about the cruelty of biology. Ali had spent his entire life defying expectations, defying odds, defying gravity itself. But you can't defy time. Time doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care what you've accomplished. It comes for everyone. The locker room after the fight was worse than before. Ali sat on a wooden bench, his head in his hands. His face was swollen. His body ached in ways it never had before. But the physical pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the knowing. For years, people had been telling him to stop. His wife, his doctor, his friends, and he'd ignored them all. Because he was Muhammad Ali. He didn't stop. He didn't quit. He didn't accept limitations. Until he had no choice. Someone helped him to the shower. Someone else packed his equipment. The rituals of boxing continued around him, but Ali wasn't really there anymore. He was somewhere between who he was and who he was becoming. A transition he wasn't ready for. Nobody ever is. Especially not men who built their identity on being invincible. When the invincible becomes vincible, what's left? Later that night, alone in his hotel room, Ali sat by the window. Outside, the Bahamas looked peaceful. Waves crashed against the shore. Palm trees swayed in the wind. The world kept moving, indifferent to what had happened. Ali stared at his hands. These hands had beaten Sonny Liston. These hands had knocked out George Foreman. These hands had survived Joe Frazier 3 times. But now, they just shook. Slightly. Constantly. A tremor he could no longer hide. He thought about his daughters. He thought about his legacy. He thought about all the things he'd said over the years. Float like a butterfly. Sting like a bee. I am the greatest. Impossible is nothing. Bold declarations that had defined a generation. But in that hotel room, in that moment, they felt like lies. Not because they weren't true once, but because they weren't true anymore. And Ali had to carry both truths. The truth of what he was, and the truth of what he'd become. The doctors had warned him. The brain scans showed damage. The slurred speech wasn't just fatigue. The tremors weren't temporary. His body was breaking down in ways that couldn't be fixed. But athletes, especially great ones, don't listen to doctors. They listen to the part of themselves that refuses to quit. That voice that says, one more fight, one more round, one more chance to prove everyone wrong. Ali listened to that voice, and it led him to Nassau, to a cow pasture, to a loss that would forever mark the end of an era. Some say the damage from that fight accelerated his Parkinson's. Others say the Parkinson's had already started and the fight was just a symptom. Medical experts still debate it. But Ali never blamed the fight. He never regretted stepping into the ring that night, because regret requires admitting you were wrong. And Ali, even diminished, even defeated, couldn't admit that. Not publicly. Maybe not even to himself. What broke that night wasn't just his body. It was the illusion. The illusion that willpower conquers everything. That belief overcomes biology. That legends are immune to the rules that govern ordinary men. Ali had built his entire life on that illusion. And when it shattered, he had to figure out how to exist in the pieces. How do you live when the thing that defined you is gone? When the gift that made you special disappears? These are questions Ali would spend the rest of his life answering. In the years that followed, Ali would become something different. Not a boxer, not a champion. Something harder to define. An icon of resilience, a symbol of grace in decline. He attended events. He lit the Olympic torch in Atlanta. He smiled for cameras, even as his body betrayed him more each year. People praised his courage, his dignity, his refusal to hide. But they didn't see the private moments, the frustration, the anger, the grief for the man he used to be. The fight against Berbick was supposed to be a comeback. It became an ending. But endings are strange things. They're never as clean as we want them to be. They bleed into what comes next. They shape how we remember everything that came before. Ali's ending wasn't dramatic. It wasn't poetic. It was just sad. A great man reduced. A legend made mortal. And maybe that's the hardest truth of all. That greatness doesn't exempt you from decay. That being the best doesn't mean you get to leave on your terms. People still argue about Ali's legacy, his politics, his religion, his relationships, his choices inside and outside the ring. But the Berbick fight adds a different dimension to those conversations. It shows vulnerability. It shows that even Muhammad Ali, the man who claimed to be the greatest of all time, couldn't escape his own humanity. And there's something profound in that. Something honest. Because the real measure of a person isn't just what they achieve. It's how they handle loss, how they face decline, how they exist when the world stops cheering. Ali faced it imperfectly. He fought too long. He risked too much. He ignored warnings from people who loved him. But he also showed something valuable. That you don't have to be at your peak to matter. That your worth isn't determined by your current abilities. That the man who loses with dignity teaches us more than the man who only wins. These lessons cost Ali dearly. But he paid the price. And in paying it, he gave us something to learn from. Imagine being him that night. Knowing, deep down, that this is the end. That your body will never respond the way it used to. That the thing you loved most in the world is gone. And you have to keep going anyway. You have to walk out of that ring. Face the cameras. Answer the questions. Smile when you don't feel like smiling. That's not weakness. That's something else entirely. Something harder than any fight. The Berbick fight lasted 10 rounds. But its impact lasted forever. It changed how we remember Ali. Not as invincible, but as human. And maybe that's more important. Because invincibility is a fantasy. Humanity is real. We all face our Berbick fight, eventually. The moment when our bodies, or minds, or circumstances force us to confront our limits. What matters is what we do with that moment. Do we hide? Do we deny? Or do we, like Ali, keep moving forward, even when forward means admitting we're not who we used to be? The sun rose the next morning in Nassau. Ali was still there, still breathing, still Muhammad Ali, even if a different version. The world kept turning. New champions emerged. New stories got told. But something changed that night. A shift in understanding. A recognition that even legends bleed, even gods fall. And when they do, we have to decide what that means. Does it diminish what they built? Or does it make it more valuable? Does their decline erase their peak? Or does it prove that the peak was real? Some call it the saddest fight in boxing history. Others call it inevitable. But everyone who watched it felt something. Discomfort, pity, respect, grief. A complicated mixture of emotions that's hard to name. Because we were watching more than a boxing match. We were watching time itself win. And time always wins. No matter how fast you are. No matter how great. Time is undefeated. Ali left boxing that night. Not officially at first. There was talk of another fight. There always is. But deep down, everyone knew. The door had closed. And unlike his previous retirements, this one stuck. Not because Ali chose it, but because his body made the choice for him. That's the cruelest kind of ending, when you don't get to decide, when your say in the matter is gone, when your only option is acceptance. Years later, someone asked Ali about the Berbick fight. His response was simple, quiet, almost inaudible because of the Parkinson's. But the words were clear enough. I did my best. No regrets, no excuses, just a statement of fact. He did his best. His best wasn't enough. And somehow, he made peace with that. Or at least, he learned to carry it, which might be the same thing. Nothing dramatic happened in Nassau. No knockout, no spectacle, just a decision loss, just a man reaching the end of something. And that's exactly why it mattered. Because the real breaking points in life aren't dramatic. They're quiet. They happen in small moments, in accumulated damage, in the slow realization that you're not who you were. Ali's breaking point came in 10 rounds against a fighter most people have forgotten. But we remember Ali, not because he won that night, but because he was willing to be there at all, to risk everything, to face the truth. The legend of Muhammad Ali is complicated now. The young lion who shook up the world, the conscientious objector who stood for principle, the champion who came back, and the man who stayed too long. All of these versions exist simultaneously, and the Berbick fight is the bridge between them. The moment when the mythology met reality, when the story had to account for decline, when the narrative got harder to tell. But here's what that fight taught us. Greatness isn't just about winning. It's about what you're willing to risk, what you're willing to face. Ali could have walked away earlier, protected his health, preserved his image, but he didn't. He stepped into that ring in Nassau because some part of him needed to test himself one more time. Needed to see if the magic was still there? It wasn't, but the courage was. And maybe courage is what lasts longer than talent anyway. The cow pasture in Nassau is still there. The ring is gone, but the ground remembers. And anyone who understands boxing understands what happened there. The night the greatest became just a man. The night the impossible became undeniable. The night Muhammad Ali's body finally said no. And he had to listen. Some call it discipline, others call it delusion, but that moment still defines how we remember him, not as invincible, but as human, not as perfect, but as real. And in the end, maybe that's the greatest gift Ali gave us, not his victories, but his willingness to be seen in defeat, to show us that even legends have limits. And when you reach yours, you don't disappear. You just become something different. Something quieter, something true.